I've been in the Gospel of Mark for a very long time. This is the longest, I keep saying this every week, but everybody pretty much knows it, but maybe somebody new is watching online or somebody. Probably the longest, well, it's not probably, it is the longest series I've ever done since I've been in the ministry. This is part 18. We're going to break this down eventually, probably after it's finished. We're going to break it down and we're going to put the chapters each week that we covered, the chapters and verses that we covered, and we'll also probably put some subtitles in there. Like, for example, when Jesus fed the 5,000, we'll put the chapters and verses in there that we covered, and then we'll put Jesus feeds 5,000. So you can go back through this whole series and you can just glance and you can see where we were each week and what was going on in the teaching. So make it easy for people, because I've already had people ask, Pastor, it's just part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4.5, all the way to part last week it was part 17. I don't know where to go. I want to get to that part where you were talking about such and such and such. Where's that at? What part is that? Well, we'll have that all broken down for you when we finish. We'll go back in and we can change the titles on the existing videos that are online on Facebook and YouTube, and we will edit them and correct the, we'll add, not correct it because it's still part 18, but we'll add the chapters and probably, like I said, subtitles about what was going on in that chapter that we studied. So I talked about this a little bit last week. Well, actually, we've talked about it twice because 2 different times it's come up already. Jesus is already Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Okay, let me just back up and make that statement. They're on their way. He's taking the 12 with him, and many, many other disciples are following him, but mainly the 12, and they are on their way to Jerusalem. Now, a lot of people were traveling with them, probably, and a lot of people that were kind of distant were just walking along down the road to Jerusalem. Why? Because it was coming up on very soon Passover. Passover was coming up very soon. Passover was a time of year that, way back in the Old Testament, it had been encouraged and taught to Jewish people and, of course, Jewish scholars and Jewish rabbis that it's great to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover each year if you can. It was not mandatory, but it was expected that at some time in your life you would take your family, go to Jerusalem, and celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. And so there were a lot of people going to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going to Jerusalem along with the 12. And on their way to Jerusalem, I want you to get this picture. On their way to Jerusalem, some events occurred that are just amazing. First of all, the first thing that happened, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks back, Jesus mentions, what do you think about those scriptures that talk about the Messiah, the Son of Man suffering, the Son of Man being forsaken, and the Son of Man being rejected? He brings up the subject in a kind of an indirect way, but he's implying, they knew that when he said Son of Man, he was talking about himself. Because he actually said a number of times, the Son of Man this, and, do you believe that I have power upon earth to forgive sins? I say unto you, sick of the palsy, rise up and walk. In other words, and they called him the Son of Man. They knew that when he said Son of Man, he was talking about himself. And it's in the book of Mark. Numerous times he performed miracles and the Son of Man healed this person. The Son of Man healed that person. Jesus, well, who was it? Jesus was the one that healed them. So all you got to do is just think it through, and you obviously see that the Son of Man was Jesus in those passages. So Jesus talked about his suffering, his rejection, and all of this. And he's asking this question to the disciples, well, who do you think it's talking about? Who do you think? And they don't, the disciples just kind of, I don't know. They don't answer. They just kind of back off, and, it's like, we aren't going to touch that subject, Then a little later on the way to Jerusalem, he stops and he just tells them, The Son of Man is going to go to Jerusalem and is going to be rejected by the rulers and the religious leaders, and the Son of Man is going to die. And you remember, I think I read this one last week, if I remember correctly, Peter rebukes him. Nobody's going to touch you, Lord. We'll fight for you, Jesus. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, get thee behind me, Satan. That was last week, I believe, or the week before. So how much more explicit and obvious can it be made? First of all, you got many of the Old Testaments prophesying about the Christ, the Messiah, suffering and dying, nails being put through his hands in the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms, a crown of thorns shoved down upon his head. You've got all these prophecies in the Old Testament. While he's hanging on a cross, they gamble for his garments. That's all prophesied in the Old Testament. Prophecy after prophecy after prophecy that Jesus fulfills. And then you've got Jesus himself on the way to Jerusalem with his disciples for the very last time. This is his last journey to Jerusalem. Jesus himself saying the Son of Man is going to Jerusalem and he's going to die. And this is what he says in chapter 10, verse 32. Now they were on the road going up to Jerusalem. I want to define that phrase just for a moment. In Israel back then, 2,000 years ago, every area of Israel. Now, we know they were coming from Galilee, right? Everybody remember that just a few weeks ago we were in Galilee, around the river, the river Jordan coming from Galilee, but the Sea of Galilee. Jesus walked on the water, performed miracles. In Capernaum, he healed people, did, many, many, many miracles. Thousands, probably tens of thousands of people were following him in Galilee. Well, Galilee is about 100 miles north of Jerusalem. So in a modern map, you would look at it and you would say, well, they went from Galilee down to Jerusalem. But not so in the time of Christ. In the time of Christ, everyone in Israel, everyone in all of that area and all that land went up to Jerusalem. You say, why? Because Jerusalem was the highest city in all of Israel. It's at about, even today, it's at about 2,400 feet above sea level. It's the highest place in the land. It's the place where it's Mount Moriah. It's the place where Abraham offered up his son Isaac as a sacrifice 2,000 years before Christ. For anyone that doesn't have this, and I know you say, Pastor, you've preached this so many times because it is such a beautiful prophetic picture. It is gorgeous when you think it through. Okay, 2,000 years before Christ, Abraham went up on Mount Moriah, the same mountain that Jesus was crucified on, the same place that Jesus was going to on this day. He was going to Jerusalem, to Mount Moriah, to die. Abraham went up on that mountain. God said, offer up your only son, Isaac, the son of promise. It was the only son of promise. And he raised the knife and he was about to sacrifice his only son when the angel of the Lord stopped him, and God provided a ram caught in the thicket over somewhere to the side, and he says, take the ram and offer it up as a sacrifice. That was a prophetic picture of our Heavenly Father offering up his only son. 2,000 years later in the future, Jesus would be sacrificed on that same mountaintop for all mankind, for all ages. You get the picture? Everybody get it? It was a prophetic picture that was given in the book of Genesis when Abraham offered up his only son, just like Jesus Christ was offered up by God the Father on that same mountain, Mount Moriah. It's the most contested piece of property on earth. It's about 35 acres large, about approximately 35 acres, and they're fighting over it now. If you're watching the news, you know that Israel is in a war right now. They're fighting. They have fought over that piece of property for thousands of years. It is considered to be the most sacred religious place on earth. 3 major religions come together right there. Of course, everyone knows now the Dome of the Rock. There's a Muslim mosque that's built there now. But we also know that according to all the prophecies in the Old Testament, and there's a whole lot of them, that whenever Jesus Christ comes back, Israel's going to exist, and the city of Jerusalem is going to exist, and he's going to walk through the eastern gate into Jerusalem. It's biblical. The prophecies all state it. And for 1,000 years, for hundreds of years, theologians and Bible scholars back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, they would read their Bibles and they were perplexed when they talked about Jesus entering into Jerusalem when he comes back, and they think, how can that happen? There is no, basically the city of Jerusalem is in shambles. There is no nation of Israel. There's no nation of Israel for him to come back to, because the land was a desolate, forbidden place. In fact, Mark Twain visited it quite a long time ago, and I think the 1800s he visited Jerusalem or Israel, and he wrote that it was a desolate, barren land, that he traveled for like several hundred miles and didn't see nobody. He saw it was somebody said, oh, the Palestinians lived there. No, they didn't. They claimed that they owned it, but they really didn't. And if there were any Palestinians there, they were so scarce and so few till, maybe one every 100 miles or one homestead every 50 or 60 miles, just scattered so sparsely that, it was a barren land. Mark Twain wrote about it. Actually, some other people wrote about it too. Don't have time to go into the history of that. But what few Palestinians were there, they weren't really occupying and functioning as a nation. They were just scattered, a few Arabs living there, very few Arabs. And in the late 1800s, the first Jewish settlements started being rebuilt in that area. The first, what they called kibbutz, they started rebuilding them. And from that moment forward, the land started flourishing. In what was a dry, barren desert that wasn't producing anything, the Jews came up with this, what they call the drip system of irrigation, and they turned that desert into one of the most rich, fertile areas on earth. Today, Israel makes billions of dollars a year producing produce, vegetables, grapes, all kinds of things, and feeding Europe. They feed a large percentage of Europe from the little tiny nation of Israel. It's how they make a lot of their money. I don't know if you knew that or not. Go research it. Go online and research it. You'll see. That's how they make billions and billions of dollars, selling the crops that they grow in Israel from that desert land that has flourished into a garden now, because the Jewish people are living there and they're taking care of it. It's flourished into a beautiful, beautiful place, because they come up with all these ideas of how to irrigate and how to do it, and they turned it into a garden. So anyway, let me move on. They were on the road up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside again and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. Now, remember that they were probably traveling with a lot of other people, walking or riding a camel or a donkey or whatever. And Jesus goes to the 12 and says, come on, guys, I want to talk to you in private. Come on, follow me. We're going to get off the road over here under that big tree. See that big tree over there? And we're going to just sit down and take a break and talk. Just the 12, just us. Just me and you guys, the 12. So they all went over there and they sat down. They started talking. And Jesus, he took the 12 aside again and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. He begins to tell them the future for the third time. Look at your neighbor and say, for the third time. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man, and I've already defined that they knew who the Son of Man was, will be betrayed into the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And the third day he will rise. How much more clear can you state it? Why they didn't really seem to get it, to this day, every time I read those passages in the Bible, I think, why didn't the 12 it's like they were just confused. They were just blinded almost to what was about to take place. And I can tell you another reason that I know they were blinded is because Jesus is on a mission. He's headed to Jerusalem. He knows he's going to die on a cross. He knows that he is the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. He knows that he has lived a perfect life and pleases his Father. The voice when he was baptized in the River Jordan said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear him. Listen to him. Listen to what he has to say." And Jesus is going to die to humble himself and lay down his life. And you know what the disciples are doing? Arguing about who's going to be the greatest. Let's read it. And then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, these are brothers, they're both brothers, came to him saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Now, let's start off with, that's kind of an arrogant question in my opinion. Somebody says, "Pastor, I want you to do for me whatever I ask you." I don't know if I'd say yes to that or not. A little bit arrogant, right? And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus, common sense answer, what is it you want me to do? And they said to him, "Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." Because they also know that he's going to reign, because he had talked to them about reigning in a kingdom. So all they could see was the kingdom part of it. And it's like they kept ignoring the fact that he said, "I'm going to Jerusalem and the Son of Man is going to be betrayed and he's going to be killed. But the third day is going to rise from the dead." They're ignoring all that, and they're arguing about, because, and actually we already read this a few weeks ago, they've been arguing with the other disciples and arguing among one another about who's going to sit on his right hand, who's going to sit on his left hand. But Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Can you just kind of put that in common language? You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? Are you able to go through what I'm going to have to go through? Now, he does know the answer to that, and the answer to that is that all 10 of them, at least, will definitely go through to some extent what Jesus goes through, because 10 of them are going to die martyrs. 10 of the 12 died a martyr for what they believed, for their faith. The 11th one was John. And I've said this so many times, he was dropped into, according to historical records that the church kept, he was dropped into a huge boiling vat of oil and boiled, and they lifted him back up out of it, and he was still alive. And so they banished him to the Isle of Patmos. I believe he was still alive for one reason. God could have just took him home right then to go to heaven. But he lived, and God had one more mission. On the Isle of Patmos, he wrote the book of Revelation that we have in this book right here. As the final book, the final chapter of this book is the book of Revelation. And John wrote that while he was on the Isle of Patmos, and then he died a natural death. But he was willing to die a martyr for what he believed. He wasn't going to deny Christ. So he said to them, they said to him, "We are able." So Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup." In other words, yeah, you guys are going to suffer. And you're going to, he didn't get this explicit about it, but this is what he was implying. You're going to die too, a martyr. You will indeed drink the cup that I drank, and with the baptism that I'm baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared. And when the 10 heard it, now there was 10 of them. They're not including Judas in this. In fact, Judas isn't included in any of this as far as this is concerned. I didn't mention Judas because Judas betrayed him. We know Judas betrayed him. But when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. Actually, that is, I guess Judas is in that group, because that James and John would be number 11 and 12. So the 10, which would include Judas, were all upset because James and John wanted to be on his right hand and his left hand. But Jesus called them to himself, and he said to them, now notice this, if you want to be exalted, you've got to take the humble position. You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles, they lord it over them. And their great ones exercise authority over them. In other words, the world's way is for people to rule you like with an iron grip and to be your lord over you. But God's way is this way. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. In other words, he's trying to get this message through to the 12 that are following him to Jerusalem to die on a cross. He's trying to get this message across. You want to be great? Learn to be a servant. Learn to be humble. You know, even the world, in corporations and businesses and stuff, they teach that the majority of the time, now there's exceptions, you can find exceptions, but most of the time, people who are really successful as leaders and as, the heads of big corporations and companies and so forth, CEOs and so forth, they start on the bottom and they work their way up into that position. The person who starts on the bottom and learns and humbles themselves and works their way to the top always appreciates what they've attained much more, and they also understand what it takes to get there. And the things that they learn in that process are priceless. It's priceless. You can't put a price on it, on what you learn. I'm sure everybody in this room today, you know things about some job you've worked in your life, or if you put it this way, if you've been a mom, you understand what it's like to raise children, and there's things you understand about it that you can't put it in words, you just know. You just know because you raised kids, right? You may say, well, that's not a head of a corporation. Oh, but it's a job, right? Come on, ladies. It's a job, right? Amen. And fathers, and people that are leaders or heads of businesses or own their own companies, you learn things that when you start on the bottom and you build a company you build it and you kind of work your way up, or if you join a big company and you work your way up to the top of the ladder, you learn things that can't be learned any other way. Can't really learn them any other way. Now, every once in a while, like I said, you'll find an exception. They'll hire somebody in from outside. But the majority of the time, even the secular world understands that the best people to hire are people who've worked their way up in that company and have attained success because they understand what it means to be in that position. So Jesus says that's God's way. Whosoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first of all shall be slave of all. You got to be a servant first. I love it. And I pray over people. I pray for people. When they come to me and say, Pastor, what can I do to serve? What can I do to help you? I'll do, I think about, should I say this or not? I'm going to say it because I love this man. He's a great guy. Jose picked this table up and sat it up on this thing. That man runs 700 employees under you, brother? Is that right? 700 employees underneath him. And yet, I can say, Jose, will you take care of the table for me? No problem, Pastor. No problem. When I walk up on this platform, he's going to pick that table up and set it up on this platform. And he's got 700 people working for him Monday through Friday. So, whoever desires to be first of all shall be slave of all. You got to be a servant. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. He's talking about himself now. I didn't come to be served. I didn't come to be a king or a ruler. I came to serve and to give my life, give his life, a ransom for many. That's what he came into this world for. I'm going to cover one more thing here about Barnabas, and then we're gonna let you go home, okay? Somebody that believes I'm preaching the truth, say amen, Pastor. Thank you. So in verse 46, and now they came to Jericho. Now Jericho's getting pretty close to Jerusalem, okay? They're getting very close. In fact, we're fixing to enter into the last week of Jesus' life. Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem on what's called Palm Sunday. And as they went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Barnabas, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. Blind. Everybody say blind. Now, naturally, he was blind. But I'm going to show you that spiritually, he could see more than the religious rulers and the people who were in power in that country, in that land. He actually had better sight and better understanding and a higher level of faith than those religious rulers and religious leaders and people of power and people with money. They were all in darkness. They were all blind. They were blind. But Barnabas, who was physically blind, had more spiritual sight than they did. He sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, I want to point out here real quick. What did he say? He understood that Jesus was the Son of David. You see, to become king of Israel, you had to have royal blood in you. You had to be, according to the prophecies of the Old Testament, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, you had to be royal blood. You had to be of the seed of David, King David, because God had promised David a kingdom that would last forever. So it had to come through the bloodline of David, King David. And so here's blind Barnabas, maybe blind physically, but he can see spiritually. Spiritually, he's got understanding far beyond what the religious rulers and the people in power in Israel have got. He understands who he is, he understands who Jesus is, and he understands what Jesus can do for him. He's got faith. He's full of faith. When they were rejecting, when the other people in Jerusalem were rejecting Jesus and about to crucify him that same week, about to crucify him, coming up on that last week of Jesus' life, Barnabas was crying out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. In other words, I know you can heal me. I know you can give me my sight physically. Now, there's a beautiful spiritual analogy here if you stay with me, if you're with me through a beautiful spiritual analogy, okay? Then many warned him to be quiet. Those non-believers, those people that they were sightseers. They weren't participators. They were just there for the ride, so to speak. They warned him, hey, man, don't you understand he's too busy for you? He don't have time for you. You're just a poor, broke, blind beggar sitting by the road. Keep your mouth shut, man. Don't bother this man. He's too busy for you. But he cried out all the more. His spiritual eyes kept seeing, this man can heal me. This man can do something for me nobody else here can. Son of David! He's calling him Son of David. You're the king. You're qualified to be the king. Son of David, have mercy on me. So Jesus stood still. Then Jesus stopped walking. He heard that voice hollering, Son of David, have mercy on me. He just stopped walking. He may not have even seen Barnabas at that point, but he stopped. Because there may have been 1,000 people in that. We don't know how many. There was lots of people. The Bible said there was a crowd of people following him. Jesus may not have even seen Barnabas, at least physically, but he might have seen him in his spirit, and he definitely heard his voice calling, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he commanded him to be called. He said, go and get him, bring him here. And then they called the blind man, saying to him, oh, now I can see some of the same people have been telling him to shut up and be quiet and all this. Come on, oh, Barnabas, he's calling for you now. Come on, buddy, come on, I'll lead you to him. Amazing how people change so fast, you know. One minute they're telling him to shut up and be quiet. Next minute they're going over and saying, come on, Bartimaeus, I'll lead you to him. Now, I'm adding to this, okay, but do you get the picture? Be of good cheer, arise, rise. He's calling for you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and he came to Jesus. And Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? Now, Jesus knew what he wanted. Of course he did. But Jesus asked that question because Bartimaeus already knew what he could do for him. And Bartimaeus had faith when none of those other people had faith. And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. It's amazing. The poor blind man, his eyes were opened both physically and spiritually, while the rest of Jerusalem, the leaders, the people in power, the religious leaders, they were blind. They were blind. Then Jesus said, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and he followed Jesus on the road.